Hello, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I am a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings. This is our second of 4 weekly preview streams for the upcoming expansion, Corsairs of Umbar. You may be seeing this image here and being like, why are we looking at dwarfy stuff? Well, this is actually an area that I think I forgot to show a little bit of last week's King's Gondor preview, and it's the opening of a new space in King's Gondor East, where the epic story will eventually take you through. So before I dive too deeply into that, let's make sure everything is working here. All right. Before I dive too deeply into that, just for those of you who are unfamiliar with the stream, this is a world design focused stream where I will be going through and exploring the world of Lord of the Rings Online with you all, answering your questions, and talking a little bit about what goes into making the Lord of the Rings Online and making the landscapes here, what we do, the behind the scenes workings that go into pulling together all of these different regions. I will not be answering any questions regarding things like PvMP, class balance, stat squish, anything like that, because that's not my area of expertise. I do apologize if my connection stutters or anything like that. Very recently moved and in the middle of sorting all of that stuff out. So in the meantime, let's start our tour of our second tour with a quick detour into the interiors of Farouk Zahar. So in Update 36, when we introduced King's Gondor East, Farouk Zahar's gates were closed to players. You weren't able to get in, but now, as part of the continuing story of Lord of the Rings Online, these gates are open and available for players to go into and explore. So this is still, as with everything that is being worked on in these areas, this is work in progress. So you see the day file switch happen there. I've been thinking a little bit on what I need to do to kind of fix that up a little bit. But we are in the interior of Farouk Zahar now. It's comprised of a couple of courtyards and a handful of interiors, and could potentially expand further if we so decided to in the future. But for now, this is what we're sticking with. A great feast hall, some doors off to the side that aren't openable, as well as a few that will take you into some smaller interior spaces. I'll show off a couple here before we head in. There's an armory. There is the kitchens, which is what we're in right now, and a couple of guest houses for characters of certain importance. I'm not going to spoil who shows up in this space, but the epic story will be taking you here. One of the fun things about playing with dwarf architecture, we never seem to get enough of it. We always want to do more, but there's just so many different pieces to the set that it's just like an interesting opportunity for us to kind of use things in different ways, in ways that we haven't done before. And in this case, anyways, use it in a color palette that we haven't really used before. It's a little reminiscent of Gundabad, but pushed a little bit more towards like a white marble look. So there we have it. We have the interiors of Farouk Zahar. Wanted to bring in some trees too, because as much as hard and rocky as the dwarf architecture set usually is, it's always nice to bring in something a little bit organic once in a while too. All right. So we've explored Farouk Zahar just in time for the day file to change, but really what everyone is here for, we are heading off to the lands of Outer Gondor. Outer Gondor actually is comprised of 2 distinct regions. We have Anfalas in the south, and we have Pinathgelin in the north. Onphalos is a little bit more arid, a lot more coastal, whereas Peanithgalen is kind of the breadbasket of Gondor. It's not connected very well to the rest of Gondor, with this one lone bridge here kind of connecting it to the rest of everything else. But as you can see, we are making our way across the bridge. For some reason, my view of the stream is running much slower than what you all are seeing. So apologies, I may end up refreshing my browser a couple of times to get things going in the right way, and maybe going a little bit slower than I usually do while I'm still like adjusting to the new network here. Hello. Make sure the names are off. All right. So we are now making our way through the wilds of Onphalos. So these two areas are a fairly substantial portion of landscape, and one of the things I would encourage everyone to kind of brace for is, this is probably the most wide open portions of the expansion pack. Once you leave here and move to the Shield Isles and to the Cape of Umbar, things get a little bit more constrained, mostly just in terms of geographical features. You don't have these wide open vistas. You get lots of great views of the ocean in those areas, but you don't get a lot of terrain in those areas because it's coastal. Let's see if we can get a good view of Dol Amroth while we're here. I might just cloak because one of the things that is distinct too about starting to do these streams in current level cap areas is things will threaten and attack me now, and that's just gonna slow us down as we are exploring. So you can see the White Mountains to the north here, as well as Tarlong's crown, I think it is, or neck, one of the two, that heads north into the Blackroot Vale. We kind of, last week when we were doing the tour of King's Gondor West, Western King's Gondor, we came down this valley here and did a little bit of a peek out into Onphalos. So we are now, do we have a map in place? We do not have a map in place for this yet. You'll have to use your imagination as to where we are running. I was going to stay on the road, but I think I'll kind of skip off the road for right now and make my way through the wilderness. We're going to head first to the town of Melgobas. This will be the first town that you encounter in Onphalos, and hopefully it offers a bit of an impression as to what the look and feel of the villages in at least Onphalos are going to be. Trying to push them a little coastal, a little bit more Mediterranean in feel than just giant brick structures everywhere. So Druid's Fire asks, are these some new rocks and tree assets? These are actually not new rocks and tree assets, though one of the things that we always try to do whenever we are building a new region is find interesting and unique ways to combine assets. Excuse me. It's always useful for us to sorry. It's always useful for us to try to find a way to get the most leverage out of the assets we have. So while these may not be new assets, they are new ways that we're using them. We're figuring out, particularly these new rocks that came in as part of Before the Shadow, we're figuring out ways for us to really get a lot of mileage out of them. how can we use them in new and distinct ways? Um, there was another question further up from Dan the Man asking, could the team look into making the camera stay above foliage when the camera angle is low? That's not something we have specifically on our radar as far as foliage and whatnot goes. I have certainly seen ways that different games kind of manage that, and some of that is making certain assets invisible when they are a certain distance from the camera, and that may be an approach that we can take for that sort of thing. So here we are in the little village, fishing village of Melgobas, trying to make it feel like it's a Gondorian village, but kind of push it in a direction that feels less, big imposing structure and more like quaint villagey. That's kind of the hallmark that I wanted to have throughout all of the little villages in these regions. Is these aren't the like big impressive Gondorian fortresses. These are little villages out on the fringe that have remnants of Gondor, but are not as imposing as something like Dol Amroth in the distance. A second. All right. So yes, Tyranitis says, can you please show the map? The map is not currently available yet. It's in process. We're working on building it. So yeah, I'm enjoying working. Oh, that guy's not happy about not catching something. I've been enjoying playing around a little bit with the kind of coastal assets here. It's a different kind of coast than what you would see in Shield Isles, which we'll see next week. It's a bit more rugged, kind of honestly like a little like gray and sad and a little gloomy. And that's somewhat intentional to kind of act as a counterpoint to when we go further north, looking towards Peneth Gelen. So yeah, here is Melgobas, your first village and quest hub in Outer Gondor. There's a question. Let's see, a couple more questions while I'm moving around. Norbert419 asks, what is it you are most proud of in the game? It can come from this expansion or older ones. Do you think this is your best work up to this point? I will honestly say I think that my best work is Swanfleet and Cardolan. I think I really tried to take what our design processes were and push them in a direction that really modernizes the look and feel of what LOTRO can be. I'm not to say I'm not proud of what I've done here in Onphalos and in Peneth Gelen, but I really think that Swanfleet and Cardolan they're my babies. They're the regions that I kind of took from start to finish. Had support in Cardolan, but Swanfleet in particular was solely my like design efforts, and I'm really proud of how that turned out. Bampo Biff says, will we ever get AFK fishing? That is a question for the systems team, not for me, unfortunately. I'm not able to answer that. Quick Us Me says, do world designers add little Easter eggs that are possible to find but not very obvious? It usually depends on what time we have and how we're inspired to do things. I think particularly when we're building towns, we all have these little like finishing touches that we like to add to things to kind of show some of our character in the work that we're doing. Occasionally, we will put in little Easter eggs. But generally, when we are building out a region, the little like quirky things are more about, you know, us wanting to add character to the space. Dan the Man asks, is everything going as planned with the expansion so far, or any snags? I think any project um, has both, you know, smooth goings and tough goings at times, and it really all depends on what's being worked on, and if there are little. Oh, hey, he's just walking too close to that fence there. Um, yeah, so I think there are times where, you know, if we're working on something, it can be a little tough. Oh, we need to make sure that these guys don't have physics either, because stable routes won't be happy. Uh, so yeah, it varies. I would say in general things are moving along pretty well, and we're looking forward to releasing this later this year. Let's see. A few more questions. Um, let's see. Can you explain what happened with the giant rock that appeared on the road in Bree to set this record straight? So what happened there was purely an accident. Um, you know, there are some times where, you know, something gets copied or pasted completely unintentionally, and that was that case. I think we were trying to do some optimizations in Breland, and what was a fence post ended up accidentally getting selected and turned into a rock as part of a bulk edit. So, so here we are in Barad Fane. This is another little quest hub on your way through, as well as a major POI. We want to make sure whenever we're building a region that we, you know, have, you know, points of interest that you can both see from a distance and kind of navigate your way towards, as well as when you get to those places, give you great vantage points out over the areas that you've both come through and are going towards. Druid's Fire says, I love these scraggly trees, really gives a seaside windy beach vibe to me. Yep, that was the intention here. You know, wanted Amphalos to be a bit more on the rugged side of things. Um, you know, and I think we do a pretty good job of rugged when it comes to building our landscapes. All right. Fekles says, does it ever make you depressed when working on areas like that are just gray, dull colored, and then happy when it's full of colors? I think it's something that we are very keenly tuned in on when it comes to visual fatigue in an area. We want to make sure that there is diversity in what you're seeing and what you're running through, so that, you know, if something is feeling somewhat oppressive, there are these like bits and pops here and there that really stand out. You know, that's why we try to make sure to have things like these frills on the landscape to add a little bit of color. You know, patches of greener grass versus the grayer, drier grass. And then, of course, there's, you know, things like sunsets and sunrises that we try to have impart a little bit more color to kind of give you that relief. Certainly, areas like this, you know, do have a bit of a drab feeling to them because that's how they're intentionally designed. But the tricky thing is finding that balance between that color scheme and adding in those bits of life here and there, bits of things to kind of draw your eye in different directions, and to just give you, you know, great viewpoints that kind of better showcase what an area can look like. You know, I think places like Angmar, Mordor, and Mirkwood all have their challenges in that they're supposed to be these very specifically dark and gloomy spaces. And from a storytelling perspective, that's very like compelling and evocative. But from a player perspective who may be spending, hundreds of hours in those spaces, it's very kind of challenging. All right. Let's see. Do you draw? So Trish Lambert asks, do you draw from real life landscapes in your world design? Yes, we do. Very often we will start by researching. We'll have a sense from our research as to what an area might be inspired by, and then from there we start looking at real world locations to kind of get a sense for color palette, look and feel, the kinds of plants that might be in those areas beyond what is specifically called out in the lore. The source materials very often will incorporate specific plants and fauna that are supposed to be in those areas. So we'll take those, but then we need to kind of extrapolate from there and figure out what's next. Where do we go from there? So we are now approaching the major hub of Onphalos and Pinithgalen. This is Lond Curian that we're coming up to here. I want to get through a couple more questions, and then we'll start going through the town. So above Manwy says, is there a chance of adding traveler merchant NPCs throughout Middle-earth, or just travelers? Seems some areas feel a bit dead where it's supposed to be a trade hub, like Dale or Erebor. That's certainly a possibility. One of the things we try to do, and we'll see this as we walk around here, is through our town color, impart a sense of being lived in with color NPCs, with interiors such as like these auction halls that kind of there we go. Like I said, alpha, we're working on it. Where we can kind of showcase the life of the places that we're being in. I think the tricky thing about doing things like vendors and whatnot is always, like, what do they have to sell? Is it worth the cost of placing a full-on NPC when you could just have a static guy like this walking around kind of inspecting his wares? It's always kind of a tricky thing to figure out. One of the things that I experimented a bit with here in Lond Curian is the use of our scene file tech to kind of deco out, do like a first pass deco pass on things. So take the random crates that we would normally hand place around and see if we can use our scene file system to better distribute that. All right, let's see if I can catch up on some questions. Ginger says, drab, I think this is gorgeous. Well, thank you. I think by drab, I'm talking purely in terms of the color scheme. So for one of the things that I was talking about too, about using assets in different ways, you may see these buildings here, which may look familiar. They are our classic human buildings, but with a outer Gondor appeal to them. Lost Shire Hobbit asks, what made you decide to include Outer Gondor on the road to Umbar? Was it natural thought, or more of a, hey, let's expand this way whilst we're going out to Umbar? I think it was a little bit of both. There was certainly an interest in coming out this way as part of work that we would eventually be doing, and it just so happened that our content designers, Made of Lions in particular, had stories in mind when it came to these areas. So it felt like a good way to go. also because we're leaning into the Mariner and wanted to eventually get to Umbar, it kind of made sense to stick somewhat coastal, at least as much as we could, which is why we went with King's Gondor, why we went with um, Outer Gondor, to kind of continue along the coasts of everything. Um, One of the things that we've done here too, as part of Lonkirian, is we have a bunch of little social interiors as well. I know when we built Swanfleet, that was something that people were really interested in having more of. So with Lonkirian and with Ost-Arndir, another major town in the area, we've got a bunch of social interiors here for people to explore and use. But all of them also have their own NPCs placed with them, whether it's trainers or certain vendors. They're kind of scattered throughout the town here. Looks like there's a storm brewing out there on the ocean. Let's see. Minas Morgul. Norbert says Minas Morgul is not very colorful, but I liked it very much. Finished the region, the epic there just yesterday. Well, that's great. I think we learned a lot with our work in Mordor, and we're able to kind of apply that to help Minas Morgul feel a little bit less oppressive from a player fatigue standpoint. All right. Well, I am dawdling along, and we're already halfway through. So I've got to book it because there's still a little bit more left to see here in Onphalos before we head north into Peneth Gallon. Personally, I ended up. I think I really enjoyed a combination of I really enjoyed working on the shorelines of Onphalos, but I also really enjoyed working on the hills and valleys of Peneth Gallon. So I think there's certainly a good combination of things that were really enjoyable while working on both. You can see Peneth Gallon from here up to the north where that causeway is. Durhasa says, are these bushes intentionally growing on solid rocks or stairs? Likely if it feels like there is a bush growing on stairs, then that is very unintentional and something that we'll be able to fix through bug reporting and as we continue through unit testing in QA. Duded John says, are there any plans to introduce flight into the game someday? I don't think flight is really something that is appropriate for LOTRO lore. Certainly, we're not going to add flying mounts or stable masters anytime soon. We have a couple of kind of travel routes of opportunity that are associated with the Eagles, and those are very limited and specifically associated with the Eagles for story purposes. But in general, both our game world is not built to support flying, and the creatures that really exist that in the Tolkien mythology that are friendly to flying, or that are flying, aren't really the kind to suffer passengers for very long. Exterminator 94 says, I think dark and oppressive zones like Angmar and Mordor serve an important purpose in contrast to the more pleasant zones. Yes, and that is one of the reasons why they exist. You can't have your highs without your lows, right? You can't you need to have those contrasting experiences, just as we need to have some degree of contrasting experience within regions themselves. These were fun little areas to build, just these little port towns. little villages here and there scattered around. Currently, this one's occupied by Corsairs. Let's see. Pintha says, are the screen flashing when loading distant landscape, gray area over landscape tiles when turning camera, long tooth, minor tech graphical issues? I always see this when you're viewing such pretty landscapes. So I'm currently operating using a admin client, and those are not as optimized as normal clients are. So there's a little bit more hitching and a little bit more pop-in that's happening with these because a lot of the debugging processes of a admin client kind of makes the client a little bit less performant. Our hope is that with the release client, the client that you all are using, that the experience is a little bit, is better. You're not getting that popping. You're not seeing the same kinds of hitches that I am by virtue of the fact that I'm just running on a bulkier client. I wouldn't have access to my admin controls and whatnot if I was running on the same kind of client that you all use. Dan the Man asks, is reading the Lord of the Rings book a requirement to be on the team? I don't think that it's necessarily strictly a requirement. However, I'm pretty sure that you will be well served to have, at the very least, read the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You don't need to be the deepest, most entrenched fan of the books, but having an understanding of the lore that extends a bit beyond what is available through the movies is definitely appreciated for, oh, I gotta fix this too, and that. All right, well, I guess I'm coming back here to fix these things right after this. It's definitely, having that knowledge of the source material is definitely something that is very much encouraged as far as being a member of the team is concerned. It just helps with day-to-day stuff. In regards to the question about location and drawing, being that LOTRO is based on South Wales and Southwest England, do you use that for drawing ideas from Feglas? So I certainly think there are parts of the game that are very much inspired by England and Northern Europe, Northwestern Europe. But as we have kind of expanded the game and kind of moved beyond that small little area of geography, we've naturally also had to expand beyond to where our reference materials are. There's indication, for example, that portions of Umbar are kind of patterned and based off of like places like Syria and Turkey in terms of their geography. And so as we think about what we're building, we want to be kind of mindful of that. We know that Middle Earth is meant to be a sort of like alternate history of Europe and of the world in general, and so that comes into the calculation of when we're building things. So we are up in Penith Gallon now. There are a lot of little farms all over the place in this area. You can see in the distance there's one there, but there's also enemies kind of lurking on the edges of all of them. So most of these farms have a couple of guards wandering around, and they're also villagers who will defend the town as well, should it fall under attack somehow. We're trying to not let enemies wander directly into these farms, but they are kind of on the edge of everything. Let's see. Quick Us Me says, do you work on instances and raids? And if so, how different is it designing for the open world? So I think the biggest difference between the work that the world team does when it comes to designing landscape and designing instances is very often when it comes to landscape, it's very world first. We are very often the people, we're the first people on the ground when it comes to building things. We're the ones that are generally informing the look and feel of the space, what kind of assets should be used, art requests, that sort of thing. Instances are very content and systems driven first and foremost. They have either story objectives, they have game systems objectives, and so that means that building those spaces, those things have to be taken in consideration first and foremost. So for example, in building the instances for this update, for update 38, we have to kind of let the ideas percolate with our content and systems team, and they'll provide us with a high level flow map of the space. We'll have a high level idea of what the theming they're interested in for the space is, and then kind of have a progression flow through the map of like, this encounters here, this encounters here, this encounters here. This is how long we think it should take for you to run from point A to point B. And then after that, we kind of come in and start building out the spaces, kind of room by room, encounter by encounter, and getting sign off from our design team. So it's kind of it's a difference in effort based off of just like which team is kind of the front runner on it. So you can see off in the distance here, and as we do love to tease things so much, we're kind of, where are we? We're kind of here-ish now. And this all over here, which is what I'm looking at in the distance, is the Andrast, which is not accessible as part of this update. But we do love to tease things for the future. The Andrast is the hills and valleys at the further western point of the White Mountains. Let's see. So Druid's Fire says, "Wait, was that a lift? Does it work?" So yeah, the lifts in Lon are kind of our shortcuts to allow players to go from low levels to high levels pretty quickly without needing to worry about navigating through all the different stairs and whatnot. I put those in there as by and large for convenience purposes. They are not like the ones in Deepsgrave. Deepsgrave they were more akin to like a travel system, whereas the lifts here in Lon, there's just the top and the bottom, and that's it. So there's no huge, there's no selection happening. You'll just run into it and you'll teleport. Temamir says, do you guys consider putting in some jump and runs in new areas like you did in Origian, the Tower on the Hill, and Mirkwood, Galad? Personally, I have nothing against it being implemented in a quest, but I would love to be very hard and secret. I don't think we have anything like that specifically yet. Those often, I think I mentioned very briefly, like kind of moments of opportunity. Those sort of things usually end up coming in very late in the process if they come in at all. And they are things where a designer finds themselves having a little bit of extra time, and they just decide, I'm going to do this little fun thing. They are sort of Easter eggs, so that's kind of where they live, and kind of how they pop in. So, but I also honestly wouldn't tell you if there were any in here because part of the fun is just running across them and discovering them, right? Snopsake GR says, what is this storm on the ocean mean? Well, there is the cheeky in-world reasons, because oceans get stormy, but then there's also the technical reason of there are certain pieces of landscape that could potentially be visible in the distance without something like that there to block visibility. So in Penethgelen, this is like honestly one of the areas that I loved building most, is these like wooded hills, in part because like I think I have a soft spot for this sort of environment and the sort of terrain. Like this is the sort of thing that I grew up in. So like these kinds of hills and valleys just always feel so good to me, and I'm always excited to build them. I really enjoyed building the valley that Farouk Zahar is up in now as well. It's just kind of this rugged, wooded, wild area, and I'm always excited about spaces like that. Oh, we're here in Ellerby. Don't mind the TBD. Like I said, this is still in development. Ellerby is one of a couple of the farms in Penethgelen that has succumbed to attack. You can see there are goblins now hanging out in here and bodies everywhere. So unfortunate things have happened sometimes here. We also have a goat that's enjoying his time on the fence. I'll hang out here too. There we go. Would be nice if we could tag certain assets as like maybe not path blocking, but like deprioritize them for pathing onto. Fuzulaini says, when you design an interior space, are you also bound to the hook system that we use? Oh, no, I am very much not. That's part of the fun of it. Let's see. The Bromine Crick. Will the doorways in Lindleby housing ever be fixed, or will we have to continue jumping over them for the foreseeable future? Will we ever have questing available in Lindleby? So as far as the doorways, I think you're talking about the round thresholds. Those could be a somewhat simple physics adjustment. If I happen to see a bug come across my plate, I will know how to address it and know how to send it to art. As far as will there ever be questing available in Lindleby, there is at least one quest available in Lindleby. Typically, I think Rohan Housing was kind of the outlier in regards to what is available for quests in there. Building a neighborhood itself is a fairly substantial task. Adding in making quests and a reputation line for it is additional work that there isn't always time for. I think we try to have at least an intro quest for every neighborhood that's there, so that players have incentive to go and explore it. But yeah. Nadi Lulo says, gigantic bridges here and there in Anfalas, West Gondor connection, just some wooden scaffolding as a fix. Well, I mean, I think the point in the story that these regions are in is not too long after the war has ended. So it's a little difficult to kind of rebuild a whole stone bridge in a short amount of time, and it takes engineering work. But when you're just trying to, provide access back to the rest of the world, scaffolding will do. Evernight GRZ says, are you involved in making any of the new instances or raid space in Umbar? I am involved in making the raid space for Umbar. I actually have to review the plans for it with our designer tomorrow, because I have a very busy rest of my day today, so I'm not able to actually do it today. But that's the plan for tomorrow. Wander V15 says, is it Andrast beyond the river? Yes, it is. Eglanel Indradir says, will we get a new origin area for the race of men? Having the ability to stem from Umbar would be obvious now. We do not currently have any plans for a new starter area. I think if we were to do anything, I know when we introduced the River Hobbits, they have a fairly short intro experience before moving on to Mossward. My anticipation would be is um, most new races that are introduced in the future, and most new player races that are introduced in the future, would have a similar treatment. You know, at minimum, Mossward becomes their new starter area, but they may have a thematically appropriate intro instance as well. But don't take that as this is how it will be. This is just what we did with the River Hobbits. It would not surprise me if we did something similar in the future with additional races, should we add them. Above Manwë says the water texture looks great. With that, I have noticed that some water textures, since the water fix, some textures have the circular borders. They now have square trapezoid borders. Any chance to fix that? That I would say is a case-by-case water type. If there are certain ones where you're seeing that it looks particularly egregious, please submit a bug on it, and then we can have either the World or Art team investigate it. So now we are in Ost-Arndir. This is the second largest city in all of Outer Gondor. Similar, it does have some of its own unique interiors as well, mostly just to make sure town services are met. Oh, hey, the Watchman defeated the Hillstalker. But physics is not letting me into this, so we're not going to go in there right now. Maybe we can get into the tavern. This is the joys of game development. As you're running around playtesting things, you start bumping into walls and whatnot. And it's even more fun when it happens live and you're showing it off to a bunch of people. So here we are inside the Grape and Grog. This is a somewhat packed little thing, but it's mostly packed with our class trainers. This is kind of where we've put all of our class trainers for this space. And we have a guardian and his dog. This is my, you're talking about, earlier we were talking about people putting in Easter eggs, and how I kind of alluded to there being, us kind of leaning more into like adding little like color that makes us happy. And this was something that made me happy, was having a guardian sitting at the table and the dog just begging for food. I thought that was a, entertaining little vignette. Ponton Finbury asks, is Umbar and the Shield Isles on the same map as King's Gondor, just far out across the wide open sea? Like how Eriador is the same map as Rovanian, isn't the same map as Rovanian, not connected. So Umbar and the Shield Isles are part of what we are terming the Haradwaith region. So the original game, Shadows of Angmar, existed in the Eriador region. Then once we moved into Moria, we introduced the Rovanian region. After Rovanian, we introduced the, I think it was it called Gondor? Yeah, Gondor, which took you basically up to Mordor. Mordor, the region Mordor is in, is considered our post-Pelennor Fields region. And now we have Haradwaith, which is our kind of Umbar region, basically, and where we'll be expanding out for the foreseeable future for kind of endgame content. We also have the Tales of Yore region, which was specifically built for us to have a space to make alternate timeline regions, things that are like set in the past, for example. We started that with Azanulbazar, and there may be opportunities in the future for more of that sort of thing. Let's go down through. This is more of a technical question, but also landscape. What settings make the reflections from the ground and the water not have a texture? They seem to me if they are missing the final layer of textures. If you're talking about the little water puddles, those are usually a post-processing effect. So if you have certain post-processing effects turned off, those things may not be visible to you. So yeah, now we're climbing up the mountains, because these are like some of my favorite things to build, and getting great valley views. Let me set the time of day. You can get a great view of Penathgelen from up here. I love this. This area I really enjoyed making. It took me a little while to kind of get the hills in the right way. You know, where I wanted to use the new methods that we've been using to kind of build these landscapes, to kind of have things have a little bit more of a natural feel to them. But it took a lot of work to like get the right amount of hills, and also like there are some. I think one of the things that complicated the building of this region in particular, and Amphalos too, for that matter, was there were several areas that had rivers running through them. So trying to account for the rivers, and also needing, you know, for story purposes, like this river here that we're looking out to the south, you know, from the lake. If you look to the south, that will follow it all the way down. That will connect to the bay. And one of the requirements from the story perspective was there's a boat that sails down this river as part of the story. So I basically needed this water level to be at the same level as the ocean in order to make that viable. So that made building a lot of this stuff a little tricky. But we did it. We made it work. Let's see. Going through a few more questions because we're almost done. There's one last spot that I want to go to at the very, very end of this, and I have the location to teleport to it. But yeah, I love building areas like this. Like, this just feels like building Swanfleet kind of got me hooked on building cliffs that looked like this. You know, building things that felt jagged and not, you know, basically felt not smooth. I think that's one of the things that we've had a hard time with, just by the nature of our landscape, you know, our landscape mesh, is having cliff features, you know, that use the landscape but don't feel just smooth. So Fekla says trees swaying would be an awesome look to make it look like the wind was affecting things. That's actually something that we are, not for these areas, but for a number of the brand new trees that we are introducing in the Shield Isles and Umbar. They will all kind of animate based off of the weather that's happening. So if it's, you know, we can, through our day file systems, have a wind setting, which usually only really affects like the direction that things like rain and snow fall in. But for Shield Isles and Umbar, that wind property will affect the trees as well, and you'll be able to see them swaying a little bit. We've done it a little bit before in very limited spaces, but this is the first time where we're using it a bit more heavily. Dan the Man says, can you show the raid space for 2 seconds? We promise we won't screenshot. This is a preview stream for Amphalos and Penathgelen, unfortunately. So no raid sneak previews at the moment, or instance previews through this stream as well. Do you know if Bullroar will open this week? I do not know what the current plan or schedule is for Bullroar, so I am unfortunately unable to answer that question for you. So, but what I will do is work my way up to this vista, answer a few more questions, and then go to the last spot that I wanted to go to kind of leave off this stream and to prepare everyone for the next one. Let me rocket jump my way up. This is not an accessible area, FYI, but it is a great vista. All right, let's take a look at some of these remaining questions. Why are you using statues of Argonath everywhere in Gondor? Isn't Argonath supposed to be unique? So I'll be honest, like these statues are part of our Gondor set, and we've used them, I believe, elsewhere before. Particularly, I think they're used in portions of Minas Tirith as well. Let's see. We need more Tales of Your Regions. That was an amazing area. I think we were really excited about building the Tales of Your Regions. We think that that's a great opportunity for us to kind of produce spaces that expand on the world that we're building and tell stories in eras that we are not currently specifically working in and moving forward through. Will there be any cool meta deeds for the new region? I believe there will be. Those are kind of just like our part of our standard package for new regions. Is there usually are at least a small assortment of meta deeds. Druid's Fire says, I feel like Scenario is unleashing his inner Slarty Bartfast on us when he shows his work. It certainly is. Like, I made that fjord. That cliff, that mountain, those are mine. Let's see. All right. Trying to find world questions. Have you planned any updates on where to smooth out the edges of nature? Especially rocks in LOTRO have very hard, unnatural edges. Not only in the new area, but in the whole game. Smoothing them would have a fairly big impact on the overall graphics. So that sounds like it's kind of a balance between adding more polygons to an asset, and that is a tricky thing. We don't necessarily want to add more polygons to an asset because that then makes the asset more expensive, particularly if we've used that asset a lot. We're a 16-year-old game on an even older engine, so it's difficult to have super high detailed models. Particularly super high detailed models everywhere. This is not like Unreal with the dynamic level of detail editing that happens on the fly in the engine. I wish we had that, but we do not. All right, so I think I've gotten through the questions, so we've got one last place to go. This is not where we're going. This loading screen is not where we're going. But when the loading screen dumps us out, that is where we'll be when it loads. If it loads, it may not load. We were already kind of there. All right, well. You can see, it knows something is there. All right, there we go. All right, let's back up a little bit. So here we are back in Loncurian, and we are speaking with our far-ranging Dockmaster. So as part of traveling around King's Gondor and Outer Gondor, we're expanding the dock system. This isn't going to be boat pants or anything like that. This is kind of similar to what we did on the Brandywine River and all around Lake Evendim. But as you can see here from this Dockmaster, you'll be able to go to places like Dol Amroth, Pelargir, Umbar, and Halrax, which is the major hub inside the Shield Isles. So with that, it being 301, as much as I want to click on Halrax and bring you guys there, we're going to have to wait until next week. Next week will be our Shield Isle stream. We'll get you all into the tropical jungle island mood. And we'll explore that as part of our next casual stroll. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for answering or for asking the questions. I was happy to answer them. And thank you for my technical difficulties patience as I'm sorting out the new office in the new house. So thank you everyone, and be sure to tune in this time next week where we will be exploring the Shield Isles. Everyone, I hope you have a great afternoon, a great week, and we'll see you next week.